Withology is about collaboration, inspiration, dedication, influence, and positive manifestation. It's about the stories behind success, something everyone needs a little bit of help achieving. Join host Brian Tierney, CEO of Brian Communications, as he interviews the most successful business and industry leaders to hear the fascinating stories about their personal journeys and the people who have helped them get to where they are today. Welcome to Withology.
And welcome to Withology. I'm Brian Tierney, CEO of Brian Communications, and today I'm honored to be joined by Madeline Bell, who is the most amazing individual that you can possibly imagine. And when you hear her personal story, her passions, what she's doing in our region, but around the world, you'll be amazed. Madeline is the president and CEO of one of the top-ranked children's hospitals in the United States, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. We commonly refer to it as CHOP. But Madeline began her career as a night shift pediatric nurse who took that job at CHOP rather than other daytime jobs because she saw the opportunity to do great things. And she's held a variety of leadership positions over the year before assuming back in 2015 the role of CEO. She now oversees nearly 20,000 employees across a $3.2 billion plus per year health system and research institute, and has expanded it from where it was. Now it's 4 million square feet in Center City, Philadelphia, and also 60 locations from Philadelphia to South Jersey and Cape May out to Lancaster. She's a podcast host herself, discussing the latest research and the greatest innovations that are happening at CHOP with Breaking Through with Madeline Bell, which I encourage you to listen to. And on a personal note, she's a mother to 7 and has made it her mission for years and years and years to help women advance their careers and navigate home and work life. Madeline, it's a pleasure to have you here with Withology, which is all about all of us are here because of somebody else helping us along the way. And it's that with part that makes life kind of interesting and important and exciting. So go back to your early days. You grew up in Marple, right outside of Philadelphia. You always wanted to be a nurse?
I did when I was young. I wanted to be a nurse and then went to college. And somewhere along the line in college, I thought, maybe I want to be a physician. But somebody sort of helped me to see a path to nursing and to stay that path. And I'm glad I did.
So and talk about that for a second. So you went to the dean of the School of Nursing at Villanova University where you went, and you said to her, you're thinking about changing career paths. What did she say to you then?
I made an appointment to meet with her. She ended up being the dean up until a couple of years ago when she passed away for a very long time. And I said, I'm really loving what I'm doing, but I think I want to change to pre-med. And she said, well, if all of our top students change to pre-med, then we won't have any leaders in nursing. And I really want you to stay with the program at the College of Nursing at Villanova, and really glad that she did. And, a lot of the curriculum was focused on leadership. And at the time I was thinking, I'm really not interested in that. I want to learn how to take care of patients. But she knew what she was doing. She was growing future leaders in healthcare. And I'm so glad I took her advice.
So growing up, you were the oldest of 3?
Yes.
Children in your family, but your mom and dad used to jokingly say, Madeline is raising us. I mean, what do you think? You just had this kind of empathy drive inside of you, or what were you like as a young woman, young little girl?
I think that's a nice way to put it. I think I was a know-it-all. And I would maybe correct my mom and dad. and so they would always say, this is our daughter, Madeline. She's raising us. Because I think I was as the oldest child, bossy and know-it-all. And I was actually just recently having this discussion with my husband, who's also the oldest of 4. And his dad has been ill, and I said to him, you really need to act like an oldest child and start giving out orders to the siblings and give everyone assignments. And he's also a physician, and I was like, you're the doctor in the family, you're the oldest. And so he did that, and he was like, wow, that really worked. I was like, hey, I've made a lifetime out of doing this.
Yeah, just step up and do it, and all of a sudden people are saying thank you, and you're kindly leading them to new things. But when you think about it, you decide to stay in nursing, you get out of college, you're accepted at a bunch of places where you could work during the day. You decide to go to CHOP. What you're told is a permanent night shift position, at least in the beginning. And you also have friends who are probably, you know, as I think I've heard you say, friends who were spending that summer graduating, spending down the shore, and then they're going to start working. But you instead decide to take this late shift. I mean, that's got to be a big moment, though, too.
Yeah, I mean, I really wanted to work at CHOP. I was on a waiting list to work here as a new nurse for 9 months. And when they said the only opening is to work permanent nights, I said I would do that. And I had roommates that didn't work in healthcare and were out having fun. And I was going to work when they were going out to nightclubs. And really wasn't the best social life for a 22-year-old woman, but it actually ended up working out for me.
Yeah, isn't it amazing? It's like kind of get into the swimming pool and see what opportunities are there. And then you're at CHOP, you're at a, night shift, but it's world class. You're meeting the most amazing people and learning are all around it. And you probably don't look back on those nights down at the Jersey Shore and think you miss much. But
yeah, I got a few of them in.
You
don't worry.
In. And so talk about the transition from practicing, as a practitioner to an administrator and what that was like. One of the things that makes you a great leader is, and we'll talk about it a little later, the empathy that you have, the weekly emails that you send messages to people, etc. But how did you decide to make that move from being a practitioner, which was your passion, into the administration side?
Well, I really loved being a nurse so much, but I also recall questioning, certain policies and why things were done both at our hospital but at a national level in healthcare. And so I remember thinking to myself, well, I could sit around and worry about this, think about it, complain about it, or I could do something about it. I could be part of the solution. I could be that person making the decisions, setting the policy, influencing the policy. And so I kind of had a pivot point where I made that decision to leave the bedside, which was hard. Although in nursing, it's just so great because you can be a nurse on the side and pursue, another aspect of healthcare. And I continued to be a home care nurse for a really long time after going into administration, which for me as a young mother was good to make extra money, but also to keep my hand in it. And at some point I decided it was just too much to do both. But that's what I always tell people who are going into nursing is that there's incredible flexibility in that career.
So you went from being a nurse to the home healthcare thing that you were doing as a passion on the side, and then wound up managing that area for Mainline Health and then back at CHOP. Talk about what it was like to go from practicing to management.
Yeah, so I think managing people, I always tell people, is a challenge within itself. But for me, it was really a great opportunity in home care is where I sort of first became a manager. And it was an area that I knew well, from personal experience. And I think that helped influence what type of leader I was and allowed me to have a different view of that whole sector of healthcare, which is home care. And still really helpful as I think about, back when I was a home care nurse, walking into the homes of people who were taking their children home for the first time. What does that feel like? And it really helped me to help the team I was leading to better prepare parents for that experience.
Because when you think about it, you're in the hospital, it's a structured setting. Now you're in some transitional period. You're not 100% there yet. You're going home. That part of it is really, you can see emotional, and it's like the welcoming part to being home is great, but then also trying to help somebody guide them through those home experiences. That's a pretty unique part of it that people don't think of when you think of healthcare. You think of the hospital, you think of doctor's visits, but you don't think necessarily of home healthcare post all of that. That's critical, but really personal too, isn't it?
It's a really big part of healthcare, and a lot of people don't even think about it. But, you're there when the family is bringing their child home, but there's also boxes of supplies and all of this equipment. And they're trying to navigate something that the healthcare team, navigated on their own. And that's, I think really very rewarding to help them do that.
Yeah. Madeline, you talk about leadership lessons early in your career. One that you shared with me before is what you called your glass bowl exercise. Tell me a little bit about that. You had people put ideas in a bowl. Describe that a little bit to me.
Sure. When I came back to CHOP in the mid-90s, I was asked to oversee the home care team. And at that time, the home care department was losing a lot of money. And I just got together with the team and figured the solution has to be with the people who are closest to the work. I can come in and have some ideas about this, but I literally put a glass bowl in the middle of a table in a conference room and handed out a bunch of sticky notes and said, just write down any ideas that you have to reduce the cost. And they were flooded. The bowl was flooded with ideas. They had all these pent-up ideas that they wanted to share, but never had the outlet to share it. That, I think, was a turning point for me in my career to understand that people on the front lines often are the best people to make decisions and have the solutions for the problem, and that's where you have to find it.
But that's scary, isn't it, for a lot of leaders? Or a lot of people just, I mean, you don't have to be the CEO to be thinking, God, if I start asking everybody their opinions, do I really... I mean, it's important, and I've seen the same thing too. It's like the best thing is just to kind of listen, and you pick up a lot. But I do know that is a moment for a lot of folks that it's, if I open the door, what am I going to get? And I know what I have to do, and, maybe that's going to distract me, but it didn't concern you.
No, and, I always go into things thinking I know the solution, but until you get to the people who are doing it every day, you don't always know the solution, and I think it's important to understand that. And I think it's okay to open up the conversation, the ideas flowing. But at the end of the day, as the leader, you do have to be the person to make the decision. And I always talk to leaders about the importance of listening to stakeholders and pushing decision-making down, but knowing when the time comes where the CEO has to step in and make a decision. I think that's an important, it takes judgment, and it's just an important thing to understand over time.
Yeah. You and I have had conversations, a couple brief conversations in the past about that, because it's something that I've found too. It's not easy to make some of those tough decisions too.
Yeah. And for me, it's not as hard as maybe for other leaders, because we have this incredible mission at CHOP. And if I really sit down and think what's in the best interest of our patients and families and our staff, it makes this decision much easier to make. It's sometimes not popular or good for everyone, and as a leader, you have to understand that. But if it's really the best thing for the patients and their families, it makes it easy.
Yeah. Fast forward. I can't imagine, like, if you had to say, okay, so many businesses have gone through all kinds of challenges over the last year plus that we've gone through, and, whether it be in restaurant, hospitality, all those things have had devastating things. You've had incredible challenges you've dealt with because you and your team have really literally been on the front lines of this horrendous pandemic. I mean, how do you keep people pumped up? I mean, I admire one thing I know you do, which I think is so cool, is this weekly Monday morning email. And a lot of it's very personal. You'll talk about, something that both big picture, what's happening that week and what happened the week before, but also sharing a little bit of yourself about something that you happen to, just a brief mention of something you're watching, you've enjoyed on television or something like that. But talk about that part of it, how you communicate with people during a time like this.
Well, I think it's really critical as a leader to always focus on how to inspire people to do their best work. And that's challenging to do when you're in the midst of a crisis like a pandemic.
Yeah.
But it's always bringing people back to the why. Why are they here? Why did they choose this profession? And also giving them space to share their fears and concerns. Through the pandemic, many of the healthcare providers were fearful for their own welfare and the welfare of their families, in addition to their patients. And this was completely uncharted territory. We're in such a better place now in terms of what we know about protecting ourselves and each other. But for quite a few months, we all just didn't know, how did this disease spread? And so giving the team space to talk about their fears and their concerns, and not just hitting them with the facts, because there was lots of data out there, but acknowledging that it's scary, and being on the front lines like this, people, need to take breaks and they need to support each other. And I kept bringing everyone back to our values and, our leaders back to the leadership expectations that I set out for them. And as a leader, sometimes you have to be relentlessly repetitive, which gets really tiring.
Yeah, but that's key.
Because you say to yourself, like, I've said this 10 times and they're not listening. Well, they can't listen because they're stressed and scared. So just say it 12 times, and that I think for leaders in this past year, and especially those in healthcare, it's been really hard, to keep people motivated and inspired, knowing that this has been a marathon. And I was just talking to my team this morning, and, we've seen an uptick in COVID positive patients, and, it's like, here we go again.
Yeah.
And it's, it's a challenge.
Yeah. And that is, you're hitting on something that is really critical too. It's repetition. We've often said in my role of leading an organization is also advising people. It's just, I know you feel like you've said this before, but repetition is so key. And it's like when you're thinking, I can't believe I'm saying this for the 12th time. It's just starting sometimes to get through. People kind of hear it maybe in a different way. And you really, you get that. And you also do your town halls, right? Talk about that a little bit.
So when the pandemic first hit, we did town halls twice a week, and thousands of staff,
that's grueling,
would be on, and constant chat. And actually, I just came off of a town hall. We've moved to once a week, and really so much engagement. I mean, one thing that's been a silver lining, which there are quite a few, is the virtual platforms have become widely accepted and widely used, and people feel comfortable putting information and questions or concerns into the chat. And that helps me to understand, what are people thinking and feeling? What are they worried about? What do they need from us as leaders? So it's very much of a two-way platform, even though they're not speaking. Just because there's thousands of people on the virtual platform, we're giving them information. But we really spend about 30 minutes telling them, and then 30 minutes, reading the chat, answering questions. And I think it's really been, a powerful positive that's come out of the isolation that we've had.
And so you'd advise other CEOs who are considering something like that, just don't fear it, lean in, don't be upset if you have one off kind of session, which everybody would have from occasionally, but you need to look at the continuum of communication, I guess, right?
Yeah. And I think that, and using many different ways to communicate with people. I mean, because most of the people who work at CHOP are on the front lines caring for patients, it's really important for me to be physically visible. And for anybody, this is, I think, translates to many other industries where you've got people who have to be what we call location critical here at CHOP. And for the leader to show up and to just be visible and thank people. And I do that on a regular basis and have really increased that pace during the pandemic. I made it much more a part of my schedule to walk through the inpatient units and the outpatient clinics, the emergency department, making certain that I thank people and that, they see that I care, that they're there and I'm there alongside them.
But I mean, even hospital CEOs, there's a lot that don't do that, what you're doing. I mean, literally walking the halls and being there. And I can imagine how many people must say, I just saw her last week walking around, And what is interesting, and we've spoken about this a little bit last week too, it's like you could be a doctor or a nurse or a health professional of some other, and you wanted to do this and you saw certain things about it, but you just never thought you would potentially be risking something when you took it home too. And that's got to be the unique part about this, I guess, in terms of COVID. My gosh, I could have, at least now, you've done everything in terms of making sure that people know how to train to keep their families safe too. But that part of it is an emotional part of it that doesn't fit in other kinds of businesses.
Yeah, I agree. Although I think all of us are at risk who are just out close to people, but we know how to protect ourselves. And I just think for leaders, even 10 minutes, and it takes some discipline, but even 10 minutes of time stopping and visiting a department and just saying hi, I think goes a really long way. And sometimes people will say months later, like, remember when you stopped by,
right.
The A-level at our, and I realize how important that visibility and those very light touches are to people.
To make them really proud. Yeah. And on a monthly basis, you have these randomly selected employees that you get together on some kind of a basis as well, in trying to kind of connect with people over lunch, et cetera, things like that.
Yeah, that's been helpful too, because, it's amazing how much if you feed people,
it relaxes you, doesn't it?
What's on your mind? And here I am, the CEO, and they tell me all kinds of things, and I'm thinking, wow, this is really great. They're opening up. And it's also, just another really good way for me to understand what's happening.
Yeah. Diversity, inclusion, equity, all of these things have been part of, in so many ways, everything that you've done. I know the top 3 financial people in your organization are all Black too, as well. I mean, that your heels of success and what you've done earlier on in terms of reaching out to giving women confidence and seeing a career path and success and how they can create it themselves, kind of a thing. Talk a little bit about that too. You were way ahead of the curve in terms of these things.
Well, when I became a CEO at CHOP 6 years ago, I made diversity, equity, and inclusion a key part of my leadership platform. And it was sort of easy to do that as the first woman CEO in 160 years. It was a great jumping off point, a conversation point to get that discussion started and about why that's important. I started by chairing our diversity committee and starting.
You personally chaired it. Yeah.
And, just being really visible and weaving diversity, equity, inclusion into all of my messaging. Anybody who you would talk with at CHOP would be very clear that this has always been a part of my leadership platform. And then really over the past year, with the death of George Floyd and a number of other people in our community, it really increased the need to open the conversation up and really talk about race and racism and institutional racism and give people space to talk about their journey and their experiences. Just open up the aperture so that other people can understand and listen. And as a leader, not just to have good intentions, because I think many people have good intentions, but to really hold yourself accountable to do something that's different. One of the goals that I set when I became CEO is to have a much more diverse executive team. And I hired 9 executives over the course of the last 6 years who are people of color. Our new CFO, who starts Monday, April 12th, is a Black woman and who's a CFO, which is not many Black women are leaders in finance. And our chief information officer, our senior VP of facilities. So, most of the money that we spend is really controlled by Black executives. And I think that helps us as we improve supplier diversity at CHOP and become much more of a leader around supplier diversity in the region.
So critical. Yeah, that's how you change the course of lives too, as well, by so many things. So you've raised 7 children. You have a workforce that's, I guess, about 80% women, right? Approximately. What advice do you have for working mothers who are trying to figure out, especially now post-COVID, there's been one set of rules that you've been able to use, kind of working perhaps from home and all kinds of challenges that come out of that. But just in general, too, advice for working mothers.
I wish there were things that I could have known when I was a young mother that I see now, but I use some of these experiences as advice to younger women. I've had conversations more recently with my children who are grown. The youngest is 26, and they said, Mom, a lot of the worry that we gave you when we were younger and we wanted you to be involved in, the school and all these activities, we now know that we have this great relationship with you and you are also such a great role model to us. And I try to tell that story a lot to young women to say that when you're in the thick of it and you're working and taking care of your children, and particularly now for women who are homeschooling and their daycare situations or activities for kids are interrupted. So they're really having to be creative and worrying about their careers and worry about their children more than any time, I think, in history, knowing that you can show your children that they're a priority to you. But to explain to them, you won't be there for everything they need you to, but have a really open conversation. Here's the week ahead. Here's where Mom's available to do these 3 things with you. Here's what my schedule is going to be like. And when you leave for work, even though you feel like, oh, I don't want to leave them and I feel terrible, be upbeat and say, like, I'm really excited. I'm going to work. I'll see you when I get home and we're going to do these things in the evening. And so a lot of it's just like the attitude you show your children and communicate and and negotiate with them. Like, okay, I will work in the snack bar, at the Little League field at 7:00 at night because I'm going to be home from work then, but I can't come on that class trip. And, let them understand that there are things that you can do that work around your work schedule, but should still show them they're a priority. And so I talk a lot with women about that, and also about the best way to partner, with your spouse and be very clear about that communication. My husband and I would sit down Sunday nights, if you can imagine, with this whole pack of kids, and we'd look at the calendar and we would both have an open conversation about what's the week like and who's going to do this play or this game or
children.
This pickup or whatever. And we would know that sometimes we would have to negotiate between the two of us. And if anyone got sick at school, like all bets were off. That was like the worst. And my husband, who's a pediatrician, I think multiple times would get in arguments with the school nurse. Like, well, they're not really that sick. They can stay at school.
What's great about that, though, you're talking about giving that kind of advice to people. That's very tangible, practical advice. It's not like some, it'll all work out kind of concept thing, which is really helpful. I mean, those kind of tips, specific tips, which normally a person may not hear or something like that. Before we wrap up, you're on the board of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. You're on the board of Comcast. So all of these other things that you do, the Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce, these perspectives and the value that they bring to that work. What's it like to sit around the board of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia?
Well, when I first joined the Federal Reserve Bank, I was thinking, well, I'm not an economist, I'm not an expert in this, but it's so stimulating to be around the economists. Yeah. Even though they can be a downer sometimes, it's really helpful because I learn and I hear things that are so helpful for me as I think about workforce planning for CHOP and our future and our investments, our endowment investments. So it's very, very helpful, to hear, about what's happening with the economy. And one of the things we do at the Federal Reserve Board is each person who represents a sector reports every meeting on that sector. And it's a way for the economists to hear something that's, proactive versus retrospective. And for me to hear that, how is manufacturing seeing this pandemic as an example? Or how is higher ed being impacted? I think it's really stimulating and gives me really great food for thought. Yeah.
All these things kind of come back to kind of edify your day-to-day things too, as well, all these various perspectives too.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you, Madeline Bell, the CEO of Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. We call it CHOP, world-renowned in so many ways in terms of the research side, as well as the lives that are helped every single day. The emotional part of working with children must be so uplifting, but also just at times just heavy, really heavy. And you carry this burden so well. And you're such an inspiration to men and women of all races. And you're not just talking it, you're doing it. So thank you very much, Madeline, for being part of Withology with me today. Any final thoughts as we look at post-COVID world? Any advice, suggestions?
Well, I think there's tons of reason for optimism. We have all these vaccines. We know how to protect ourselves. And, I think there's a lot of anxiety about how to re-enter the world. And I think we just need to keep talking about it and supporting each other through it.
Great. Inspiration. Thank you very much, Madeline.
My pleasure.